interesting thing about my particular story was that when they said, "What do you want to do with your life?" and I was trying to figure out something that would relate to where I was or what I was interested in, because that would seem to provide some sort of guidance for, which would be the right decision for me. Well, looking at what I enjoy doing already. Well, throughout my teenage years, I did quite a bit of work with puppetry, building everything from finger puppets to string puppets and two-handed puppets, single-handed puppets, all sorts of things. I could not find any professional puppetry school at that time, so I thought the next closest thing was theater. So I would choose the best theater school at which I was accepted. And so I applied to 2 or 3 different schools. And the curious thing is, it came down to 4 weeks, the beginning of August, before the next school year was to begin. And I still hadn't heard from one school, and I had heard from the other one. So I thought I was going to go to the latter school, but then the former one that I hadn't heard from, I finally called them and said, what's the answer? And they said, "What, you haven't gotten your letter yet? You were accepted." And I said, "Oh, I was." Okay, well, between the two, I chose to go to an acting school in New York City. It seemed to be the better school, more highly regarded professionally, and would put me in touch with more diversity than I'd ever seen in my life, being in the heart of New York City. And it was an incredibly growing experience to be there. Quite an amazing reconnection with the deepest part of me, rather than that part of me I was allowed to see by the small town environment in which I grew up. The interesting thing was, I was at that school a year. I found New York City a little bit overwhelming because I really didn't have a network of friends and or any kind of social organization to support me being there. And my family, of course, couldn't understand why I would go from a town of 10,000 to a city of 10 million. It was kind of amusing in a way, because I would tell everyone in New York what it was like in the town where I grew up, and they would shake their heads in disbelief. How could anybody be that way? And I would go home at Christmas and tell everyone what I thought life in New York City was like, and they would shake their heads in disbelief and wonder how anybody could be that way. And so I was bouncing back and forth between two radically contrasting worlds. And they were both completely real, both existing during the same period of time, just in different places. And somehow it all became part of me being able to see the world in much greater diversity than I never imagined before. The interesting thing was, in choosing to go to that school, the other school, well, I was there for a year. I decided not to continue. I kind of wish now I had, but it's been many years since then, so there's no way to go back, and redo your life all over again. But maybe things turned out the way they were supposed to be anyway. But the interesting thing was, I went to that school for a year, had my experience in New York, felt a little bit overwhelmed by it all because I didn't have anyone really encouraging me to stick it out and press on, and I think I was actually doing better than they let me know, but no one was giving me a lot of feedback about how well I was doing. So I went back to Wisconsin, wasn't quite sure what to do next, wound up in a youth ministry training school for 6 months. That was kind of an intense and fascinating experience. And then after that, someone recommended that I look at a more traditional sort of college. The one I wound up going at was the second choice that I would have gone to 4 years earlier had I not gone to New York City. And so the same school came back into my life, but at a later time. And that's where I went for 4 years and got my Bachelor of Arts in Humanities. But it was very much this complex way that the question word which played out in my life, that in trying to make a decision of which should I choose, the way it played out in my particular life was that ultimately I wound up with both anyway. It was a question, as I thought I was choosing which one would be part of my life. And what, in retrospect, what happened is simply the question of which one comes first, not realizing that both would be there in the bigger picture. In any case, one of the reasons, as we try to wind up this discussion, and of course we've only scratched the surface, one of the reasons to pay careful, respectful attention to the question word which is that any decision I made, any decision I make, any choice I make between two different things, in some sense begins to set a precedent for how I live life from that point on. I can always depart from my precedents and do something new. I have that freedom. But when I make a choice, the way I make that choice feels more familiar next time I have to make a choice that is in any way similar. So, for example, in choosing to go to New York City for immediately after high school, I was choosing that which seemed to have the most potential, no matter how unfamiliar it might be. That really became a precedent, because when I finally discovered myself to be gay, and it was a discovery, not a choice, the only choice I made was whether to live a life of honesty or whether to live a lie. But when I discovered myself as gay, then the choice became, or the question in my mind was, so what does it mean to be gay? And the opportunity that came up was to become a bodybuilding participant in the 1990 Gay Games, International Gay Games, held in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And it was by participating in that bodybuilding competition that the whole chain of events that led to becoming Sister Who happened.